Okay,
Hi,
so
I'm Marcy McCarrow,
Hello, I'm Carol Cooper.
and we're here today with author and photojournalist Neil Hallam.
I'm Neil Hallam, and you can find me at 3wsneilhallam.com.
Fantastic. Hi, Neil. Good to see you. I introduced you today as a photojournalist and an author. What is photojournalism?
It's telling a story, but with photos as well as words. I started photography round about age 10 when my granddad gave me a very basic camera, and the ability to write sort of happened along the way, really. I was never that great at school, but through various parts of my career, I've just learned how to do it, and more importantly, learned that I actually enjoy it.
Yeah. But this isn't how you started your career, is it? You actually started out in the police force. Is that right?
Yeah, after a couple of false starts before that, the police was the family career trade. Mum and Dad were both in. I dropped out of school at 15, planning to follow them in their footsteps. So I went to labour in a soft drinks factory for a few years, just waiting to join. Sadly, after 3 attempts, they didn't want me. So then I went off and studied part-time law, and I worked in the legal profession for a few years. Then, age 31, I thought, well, let's have one more go, and I did get in. I don't know, probably the maturity helped, but for whatever reason, I did 23 years as a policeman.
I've forgotten completely about the bit in the middle about the law, the interlude in law in the middle there. So what does photojournalism give you, do you think, that being a policeman didn't?
Well, initially, there's a lot of similarities. Both professions need an element of being nosy. Police work, you're just delving, trying to get to the bottom of whatever it is you're investigating. Exactly the same is true of journalism. If you haven't got an inquiring mind and you don't try and seek out as much information as you can, then you're not going to be able to tell that in an interesting way. Likewise with the photographs, any of the magazine work that I do, it's the photos that draw you in. If you're not attracted to the photograph, you're not going to bother reading the text. So it's, again, using that sort of inquiring, inventive type of thought process that draws you to the right kind of photography. As to what the journalism brings you that the police doesn't, I've got far less restrictions on me. The police, yeah, I'm tied by the law for both sides of it. Everybody has to abide by the law. But it's far stricter for the police because I've got all the rules of evidence. Everything's got to be presented in a very defined way. And mostly once we get as far as prosecution, with the cooperation of the Crown Prosecution Service, all sorts of other branches of the state. Whereas all I've got to do in telling a story through my journalism is be as accurate as I can and not break any laws.
But Neil, you're also an author, and what was your inspiration for this?
That came almost by accident, really. The journalism was a gradual progression of my police career. I worked at a counter-terrorism unit dealing with chemical, biological and nuclear weapons, and it was a brand new field. So consequently, we were constantly asked for articles for various police, emergency services, publications, as well as national media. And I just got a reputation as being the clever one because I'd been a lawyer before I joined the police. So it was always, Neil, you're clever, will you write an article? And I realised I liked it. But that was the non-fiction. The fiction, I'd never got any inclination. I wrote a short story in secondary school about a fire in a tower block and the rescue attempts through it that I do vaguely remember quite enjoying doing and getting some praise for it. But as an adult, I'd never dreamed of writing any fiction. But I was on holiday in a cottage on a remote village in the Algarve in Portugal with my wife. And just from nowhere, these ideas for a storyline started popping into my head. And as while we sat around this log burner each evening, I just started tapping out a few of these ideas that were coming to me. And it took me the best part of a year, but it eventually became my first novel. Where did it come from? Well, I think it came from some of my struggles with my mental health. Again, I've mentioned you have an inquiring mind as a policeman, and you sort of look round the back of things and try and make sense of things. And I look at a lot of very creative people that have been very, very famous and successful, and they all seem to have had their battles with mental health.
Yes.
And this creativity came at a time when I was suffering through my job with the police. So again, I can't be certain, but I think the battles I was having internally just triggered something. And then all this experience that I've gained through my life just started flowing in the right direction to become a book.
That's great, Neil. Was there a defining moment or a moment of clarity in your career that made you think, just sit back and think, right, it's time for change?
Probably, I did 23 years in the police. I think I was about 10 years from the end. The retirer's off at 55 because there's a limit to how long you can carry on chasing youngsters and fighting in the city centre. Then I think 10 years from the end, I'd have been about 45. And that's really when I started thinking, well, I'm not going to be able to do nothing at 55. So what comes next? And that's really when I started looking initially at the journalism. It started out doing it for free. I've been a scout leader for about 25 years. The work I was doing for the terrorism unit, I just started offering my services to scouting magazines. And I wrote several things, one on a school in our area that specialises in music, because a lot of my older scouts were in bands or studying for music exams. And then that rolled on, and I covered a National Scouts shooting festival. And I did a scouting article. And then out of the blue, I got a phone call from an editor of a brand new shooting magazine that was just about to be launched. And he'd read this Scouts shooting article that I wrote. And he liked it. And he said, what he wanted me to do was essentially flip the audience. I'd written an article for people who knew lots about scouting, but didn't know a huge amount about guns. So he wanted me to convert my article for an audience for his magazine, people that knew lots and lots about guns, but scouts were a bit of a blank sheet to them. And I did it, and I wrote it, and I sent it in along with a load of photographs I'd taken at the event. I thought nothing more about it. And about 3-4 weeks later, they were about ready for going to publication, and I get another phone call. And it's, we've never talked money. This is what we normally pay for freelance articles. Does that sound all right to you? I thought, well, it sounds 100% more than I thought I was getting. So, of course, he got a, yeah, I think I can live with that, thanks. But then I had to go, there's rules again within the police that I mentioned earlier. So I had to then get permission for this business interest, because I was now getting paid to do something in addition to my police work. Having gone through all that and got permission to do it, I thought, well, I might as well try other avenues for the journalism. And I did a whole series for this Airgun magazine, I think four different articles based on different branches of youth work that used shooting as an activity. I've written for a couple of cycling magazines on various cycle trips that I've done. So I've gone away and had a really nice holiday, sometimes heavily discounted because of the magazine contract. And then I've got paid for writing it up afterwards. Nice. And it's just built from there. So yeah, that was all at about age 45, so 10 years ago. And yeah, if there's a moment, it was thinking, well, I've got to do something next. I like doing this. How can I develop it? And just grabbing whatever opportunities came along.
Like that.
So what have been the challenges, Neil, to getting where you are today, and how have you overcome them?
I suppose that one of the first ones was the rules thing with police getting permission to do it. The magazines weren't so difficult because it started off with scouts, which obviously the police are quite pro, because it's a branch of youth work that diverts youngsters into quite useful areas of spending the time. And the business interest permission came with a caveat that I wasn't allowed to write about my police work. When I got involved with the novels, that did create a bit of a hurdle, that although I wasn't writing directly about police work, I was writing crime fiction. And a lot of the ideas had come from things within my work. And I had to tread a very careful line between using the experience but not giving anything away. And I know I got one of the bosses read my book before I was given permission to publish it. And I got this very panicky phone call that I've talked about. I think it's called Operation Kratos. It's essentially how mainly the Metropolitan Police deal with suicide bombers. And it's really the only time that firearms officers are given permission to use overwhelming force because they want to stop a suicide bomber pressing the button. It's relatively common knowledge now, but when I wrote my first book, it wasn't. And this boss was panicking because I was going to give away some secret. But I hadn't. I Googled it. It was already in the public domain, and there was a couple of national newspapers' websites had made mention of it. And this was what I'd had to do throughout all the books that I wrote. If I thought there was an inkling that anything was stepping over the line, then I needed to make sure that I wasn't. So yeah, that was probably the biggest technical challenge. On a personal note, I mentioned earlier that I've had a few battles with anxiety and depression, and it was getting through some of the anxiety. What are people going to think about this? I've got to give it to a proofreader to look at. What are they going to think of it? As well as the other side, when there were days when I was at my worst that 2, 3, sometimes just 4 hours could disappear when I just stare at the space in the wall. And motivating myself to get past that and actually do some work was probably the biggest challenge on the personal side for me.
So, Neil, if you had your time again, what would you do differently?
I've had that conversation an awful lot of times. I had an incredibly bad first marriage, far too young, married the wrong person. It was horrible. I was 12 years before I even got involved with girlfriends again. And I've often thought, well, should I have waited a bit? Should I have done anything differently? Likewise, if I'd have got in the police earlier at 18, 20, or certainly at 18, I'd have done a 30-year full career and been out at 48, rather than 55 with a bigger pension. but I'm quite pragmatic about it. You know, I could scratch at lots of things I've done that maybe didn't work out very well, but each and every one of those things has affected some way the person that I am now.
Absolutely.
If I hadn't married my first wife and had that poor experience, I wouldn't have met my current wife, who's been a different experience altogether. I wouldn't have had the two children who are fantastic and I've still got a really good relationship with. And I've got 4 grandchildren from it. So it was 5 years of a very, very bad experience, but the good stuff beyond it's outlasted that 5 bad years. And yet, I'm not as well off pension-wise as I would have done if I'd have done 30 years as opposed to the 23 that I did. But I had life experience when I went in, so I've had a very different police career. The terrorism might not have happened without that maturity and that university study that I did to get my legal qualifications. It's everything I've done, whether it's dead-ended out, gone horribly wrong, in some way, I've drawn something from it that's brought me to where I am now.
It's almost like flipped itself on its head and made a positive out of what was maybe not so positive originally.
Yeah, and that's really the way that I try and look at my life.
Yeah. So what have you discovered about yourself then along this, you know, convoluted journey, incredible journey that you've had in terms of career and life? What have you learned about yourself in terms of strengths and traits and personal characteristics?
I think I've got quite an addictive personality. And again, it's hindsight. You look back at things. Truanting from school at 15 before I got the chance to drop out without any exams. You know, what do you do at the bottom of the school field? Well, you know, you bake cigarettes off your mates, and that grew to close to 60 a day habit at one point before I beat it with the 5 packs of Polo mints a day when I was in my mid-20s. Drink almost got out of hand, but thankfully I reined that in before it did. The studies, when I started doing both my legal study and the Master of Science degree that I did while I was away at the terrorism unit, I got very focused about the times slots that I allocated to myself, and I was massively ahead with the MSc. If I had to, they normally don't let you start your dissertation until they know that you've passed all the assessed modules leading up to it. But I'd finished everything early, and a lot of the dissertation product was coming out of my job at the terrorist unit. And cops are busy people. They were the ones I was going to tap up for the interviews and the information. So I wanted to make an early start, and I had to get permission off the university to actually start beforehand and get them to allocate me a supervisor. But it was very, very focused. I took up triathlon when the first marriage went down. Well, initially took up running and the cycling and the swimming added on top of that. And I pushed and pushed and pushed with it to the point that I was on the British police team competing internationally for 3 years in the late 90s. So looking back with what I know now, they were probably some of the early traits that led to some of the anxiety hitting later in life. But I've kind of learned to focus it a little bit more now. I'm still very driven when I've got a bit of a project on, but I make sure that I take time out to do other things and do other things with other people as well. So I'm not just single-mindedly chasing that one goal.
So what does the future hold for Neil Hallam, photojournalist and author?
Because of what I've done with the police, I'm in an incredibly lucky position. You know, there's no getting away from that. yes, I'm massively overpaid on the pension, so I'm in a better position than I might have been otherwise. But I've got a good starting point. I don't have to work. If I wanted to live a very, very simple life, I can just let the pension check hit the bank every month and just lead a nice, stress-free, easy life. But I don't want to. You know, I want to manage the stress around what I do, because I certainly don't want to be ill again.
Yeah.
But I want some interest out of my life. So, yeah, the journalism, the books kind of took over, and I haven't pushed the reportive journalism quite as much as I did back in the early days. I want to pick that up again and start writing some feature articles and doing a bit more travel. But I've now got the time for it. But I really do want to work on marketing the books. They sell, and it gives me an incredibly nice feeling every month when I get a royalty payment from Amazon. But I'm not Frederick Forsyth or Dan Brown. Nobody's going to make a Hollywood movie out of one of my books unless I can get busy with the marketing and do anything towards that myself. So this summer I'm out and about around a few book fairs. I'm busy getting those booked in the diary. So I'll be at various stalls talking to people. Some of my books are motorbike related, so I'm at motorbike events. And I'm just gaining the experience that's going to come to more plots to tell some more stories.
That's fantastic. So, Neil, how can people get hold of you if they're interested in finding more about your books or more about you in general?
Again, the internet's great, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's the website that I mentioned earlier, 3wsneilhallam.com. The email at the back of that's just as simple. It's mail@neilhallam.com. And then I've got a Facebook presence of Neil Hallam Novelist. So look me up on there. I try and keep that up to date with a few background bits on some of my characters, event information about where I'm going to be if you want to come and meet me and support what me and some other authors are doing, or just leave me a bit of a message. The books are all on Amazon as well, so in paperback and on Kindle. If you do get one of my books off there, please, please, please leave me a review, because it helps massively in giving me an idea of what people think, but also helps me sell more. And if you want a signed copy, there's a stall on my website as well, and I'll sign one and pop it in the post for you.
Fantastic. Neil, it's been absolutely brilliant talking to you today. Thank you so much for being in this slot and taking these few minutes out with us. For me, what I'm taking from you is around grabbing the opportunities. You said opportunities were coming your way, and what you need to do is grab those opportunities. So that's one message that I'm taking away from talking with you today. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Neil, very much. We've enjoyed it.